When I first met Jacob, he was just another name on my calendar. I work in physical therapy, and he booked a post-op recovery session for his shoulder, injured during a hiking accident in the Rockies. I had no idea then that this man would become the center of a memory I still can't let go of, something that shook me in a way nothing else had. Not because of what happened physically, but what it awakened in me emotionally. It was a Wednesday afternoon right after lunch when he walked in. He wore a forest green Henley shirt and faded jeans, his left arm in a sling, his face creased with a kind of fatigue I'd seen too often, pain mixed with pride. He was probably mid-40s, a few grays at the temples, a rugged face that looked like it had weathered more than just wind. "You must be Jacob," I said with a polite smile. He nodded, his voice low and polite as he responded, "And you must be Erica. Thanks for fitting me in." I led him to the treatment table, asking him to sit while I reviewed his notes. As I gently unwrapped his sling, I noticed the scar along his shoulder and the way he winced as I barely touched it. "Still sore?" I asked. "Like hell," he muttered, trying to laugh. I liked that he wasn't complaining, just honest. I respected that. We started with a few simple movements, slow stretches. I guided his arm, instructed him where to breathe, how to lean into the resistance. As I worked, I noticed his breathing deepened, and his eyes stayed fixed on my face in the mirror behind me. I was used to that look, some clients do that unconsciously. But something about Jacob felt more focused, like he was aware of every movement I made, even the ones that weren't about him. Over the next few sessions, I found myself looking forward to his appointments. That was unusual. I'd always been the professional, the kind to keep boundaries as firm as hospital tiles. But with Jacob, things blurred. He'd talk about his hikes, his solo trips to Colorado, the nights he'd sleep under the stars with nothing but a blanket and his dog. I found myself laughing more, lingering longer during his appointments, listening to stories that had nothing to do with healing tendons. One day, he came in while the sky outside poured rain, like it had something to prove. He was soaked, his hair dripping, and his shirt clung to him. "Sorry," he said breathlessly. "Traffic was insane. I didn't want to miss today." I offered him a towel and told him to change into the spare shirt I kept for clients. He disappeared into the changing room and came out in a white tee that fit him too well. I turned away, more flustered than I liked to admit. We moved into the deep tissue phase of therapy that afternoon, which meant I had to work more directly with his muscles. I applied oil to his upper back, working my thumbs slowly into the knots around his shoulder blade. I could feel every twitch beneath my fingers, his body responding to the pressure. He let out a breath, low and long, and murmured, "You've got magic hands." I smiled professionally, but inside something stirred. "Years of practice," I replied, my voice a little too soft. I moved lower, working the muscles around his mid-back, and suddenly his breathing changed. It got heavier, slower. I noticed his hands clenched at the edges of the table, and before I could pull back, I felt something, an unmistakable shift in his body. He hadn't said a word, but it was clear. He'd reacted. For a second, I froze. My training kicked in, and I told myself to stay composed. This wasn't unusual in therapy. It could be a physiological response, nothing more. But then, I looked up, and our eyes met in the mirror. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked conflicted. I don't know what came over me in that moment. Maybe it was the storm outside, or the long week I'd had, or the fact that I hadn't felt seen like that in years. I told myself to step away, to let him get dressed and go home. But instead, I stayed. I finished the session, hands trembling slightly, heart pounding in my chest. "You okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. He turned his head toward me slowly and said, "I don't want to ruin this, but it's getting hard to pretend I don't notice you." My breath caught. It was the kind of sentence that opens doors or burns them down. I turned away, pretending to check his chart, and said, "Jacob, this is a professional setting." He nodded, eyes full of something I didn't want to name. "I know, and I respect that. I'm sorry." The next week, he didn't come in. I stared at the clock that day, annoyed at myself for caring. A few days later, I received a message from the clinic's front desk. Jacob had rescheduled. He came in that Friday, looking different, more distant, like someone who had decided something. I kept everything professional that day. I wore my hair tied up, no makeup, no small talk. But when I reached for his arm to begin a stretch, his hand brushed mine and lingered. I looked at him, heart in my throat. Jacob, he pulled his hand back instantly, eyes full of regret. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. But I had already felt it. That electricity. That tension. It wasn't just him, I was feeling it too. I was losing my grip on the rules I had lived by for years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment, over and over. His hand, his breath, his restraint. I told myself to refer him to another therapist. That would be the right thing to do. But the next week, I didn't. He came in, and I let it happen again. He lay on the table, and I worked the muscles around his neck. As I leaned in, he turned slightly, and I felt his breath near my wrist. "Why are we pretending this isn't happening?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because if I said anything, I knew I'd lose control of everything. My career, my logic, maybe even my sense of self. But in that moment, I wasn't a therapist, and he wasn't a client. We were two people drowning in restraint, clinging to professionalism like it was a raft that kept fraying. One afternoon, after the clinic closed early due to a power outage, Jacob came in just to pick up his next appointment slip. I should have handed it to him and sent him on his way. But instead, I asked if he wanted tea. Purely out of courtesy, I told myself. We sat in the back room, lit by emergency lights, sipping quietly. "I think about you," he said, not looking at me. "More than I should." I set my cup down, unsure of what to say. "This can't happen," I finally said. "I have rules." He nodded. "So do I. But every time I walk out of here, I regret not saying what I feel." We didn't cross any lines that day, or the next. But every session got heavier with unspoken things. The tension between us became unbearable. Finally, one day, during a myofascial release, my hand slid over his chest. I felt his heart racing beneath my fingers. He looked up at me and said softly, "You feel that?" I did. I felt it all. I felt his vulnerability, his restraint, his desire. And in that instant, I lost the grip I'd held so tightly. My hand trembled against his skin, and I whispered, "I can't keep pretending either." We didn't kiss. We didn't touch inappropriately. But something passed between us, an understanding, an acknowledgement of everything we had been denying. He left quietly after that session. And the next day, he canceled all future appointments. I never saw him again. Weeks passed. I thought about messaging him. I typed drafts and deleted them. I told myself I had done the right thing, keeping things from crossing.